So sometimes people's view of the perfect world is just kind of weird. Hopefully, we can all agree on that part. Okay, so it feels like it's time to cover some of the weird stuff going on in the world. Weird stuff that specifically has an impact on gold and silver. Otherwise, there's just too much of it. Now, the really weird stuff would dive into the recent G20 Summit in India. Those calls for digital IDs, the one Earth, one family, one future stuff. But I think we need to start with central bank digital currencies because that's the part that's relevant. I mean, it's all related, but I'm going to try to focus on what might actually impact the value and the possible use cases for gold and silver, because that's what this channel is about. Now, I think we can all agree that CBDCs are coming in one way or another. There should be no doubt about that. But the specific implications really are still up for debate. It's easy to paint them as total loss of control of your money, something that's right around the corner. It makes for a really popular video here, but it's just fear and ignorance talking. The important part to me is not all the fear. It's not about curling up in a ball. The important part is planning around future shifts. Now, in some cases, it's just going to have to be a situation where you adapt and overcome once you know it's coming. But in other cases, I would say there's some simple things that any of us could do really to get ahead of it. And that's what we're going to focus on in this one. Before we get back to it, if you're looking for precious metals, hit up SD Bullion. New customers even get gold and silver for spot. It's sdbullion.com/new. So let's just start things off with the public's impression of CBDCs. As it turns out, people don't like the idea of being told what to do, particularly if that means being told what to do with their money. That's one reason I'm not here telling you the end is near. Another reason is that I'm not a child. But we can look past this whole technical implementation part, the idea that the government could create a dummy-proof system and just roll it out overnight. But we can't really look past the idea that some people just aren't going to like this. Now, according to a Cato Institute national survey from this May, only 16% of Americans supported the adoption of a CBDC. 16% isn't very high. Well, 68% of Americans say they'd actually oppose a CBDC if the government could monitor how they're using their money. So if the government could see what they're up to, they wouldn't like it. 74% said they would oppose a CBDC if the government could control how they used their money. And the only part of that that doesn't really make sense is what those other 26% of Americans were thinking. And we should probably point out that the Cato Institute is libertarian, and it comes out a little bit in the way the questions are worded, but that's really only for background. This idea shouldn't be a surprise. Another thing I think is worth pointing out is that the survey identifies respondents by their political affiliation. Also has demographics in there, but as you can probably guess, Republican respondents were more opposed to the CBDC than Democrats, but the distrust is actually pretty strongly held by both sides. So what all this gets at is the general state of public interest in CBDCs, and then how popular politically any actual implementation might be. A popular argument is going to be that the public opinion doesn't matter. Just take a look at the pandemic mandates. And that comes up anytime I bring this up. I'm just not going to argue it because people are either willing to see how different those cases are or they aren't. Now, I'm only interested in looking at things that we can do, not reasons why the universe is unfair. And the idea, though, that a central bank digital currency would make it easier for governments to see what you have, well, that's something I think is worth considering. On one hand, what do we have to hide? We're all paying taxes on income and assets already, so there isn't a lot of room left for the imagination. But this idea of a CBDC and a digital ID rolling out to the general public, that makes it very easy to look at the total population and then carve it up. Carve it up in simple terms into the haves and the have-nots. So we'll slow that down for a minute. I need to explain it. I'm not a they're out to get us guy. I don't make up hype stories about doom to spike views, but if a central government has a simple way to query a database that would identify which faceless individuals seem to have more than they need, well, that's where the idea of redistribution becomes relevant. Knowing is half the battle and all that, because what you can do then is see, well, hey, this person seems to be doing pretty well. Let's focus on him. Now, don't need to take that idea any further. I think we all get the implication there, even though I'm not making it as anything more than an observation. That's not even a comment on taxes or government overreach. If anything, it's just a reason to consider how we might look in a system like that and why it might make sense to own some assets outside of that system. And now we're getting into the part that's relevant to metals. Now, CBDCs, they're going to come after quick transactions first, say like fast food purchases, mortgage payments. Digital payment systems, they're going to make all that faster, and you could even say that they're going to make that better. Who cares? Digital wallets, though, and actual digital dollars, that's further down the road. And a lot of the opposition that we're going to see right now is about privacy as it relates to those two parts. And I think that that's where there's going to be the fight. And actually, let me back that up for a minute. CBDCs will probably roll out first to cover entitlements to government services. That's the carrot. Quick transactions, they would be next. Full out accounts, that's where this gets into territory that you might want to plan around. And there's nothing shady in that recommendation. Wealth planners have been doing this for as long as they've been around, and individuals were doing it prior to them being able to have a professional do it for them. So the simple case here would just be to have assets that would never show up in a digital wallet. So physical gold and silver holdings, they don't show up in an account. Problem solved. Well, not solved, but that is at least an easy start. Now, the reason this whole idea strikes me as weird rather than scary is the pageantry surrounding it. It was on full display at the G20 Summit in India. We had leaders walking around, holding hands, reading speeches about one earth, one family, one future. And the idea was that you could bring dignity to all people by implementing a digital system that violates their privacy. So, fundamental contradiction. And the disconnect was pretty clear. I don't do politics here because it's all too strange, but I got the impression the leaders had really never read the speeches prior to giving them. The things that were being said, they had no practical next steps. They were made-up solutions to misunderstood problems. It really just felt like a bunch of lip service. But at the end of the day, pageantry at a summit and implementation of an incredibly sophisticated technology platform, they're totally different things. And that's even if the politicians believed the things they were reading to us. But realistically, there just wasn't much to react to, unless you're one of those content creators who are literally looking for controversial ideas to twist into something that seems more like an imminent threat. Now, from the practical angle, it's probably not realistic to think that we're going to be able to skirt this idea entirely, hiding our fur hat purchases. That will be tough because merchant classification codes have been around for years. I made videos on that years ago. Any digital payment system is already logging purchases by vendor code. And as new systems are implemented, any existing classification, any existing reporting, that's going to come along with it. But you can lower your overall profile by diversifying across asset classes. Like I mentioned earlier, accumulate some assets off the grid. It might be one of the weirder reasons to buy gold and silver, but it still might be practical. So I could have made this really simple and just said, hey, buy some gold and silver if you want something off the radar, something that wouldn't show up in a future digital wallet. But really what I think is important here is the background, the general considerations for when and how a CBDC or even a digital ID could roll out. And that part, realistically, is slowly and in parts. So if it's something you're uncomfortable about, you have things that you can do and you have some time to get ahead of it. All that talk at the G20 Summit about inclusion and prosperity through these digital initiatives, well, sure, the idea seems great. And the implications of CBDCs and digital IDs and social scores, they seem scary. But the deadpan speeches being read off teleprompters and printouts at that event, I think they make it pretty clear there's no actual plan. There's only buzzwords being thrown around. So like I said, we have time. So let's call it good there. Let us know where you stand. Are you worried about CBDCs and digital IDs? Social scores? I mean, let's face it. Some of us would probably have pretty low scores for scoring on our online behavior. I'm maybe a C- after this one. But let us know what you think. And then while you're in the comments, be sure to hit that like button if you found any of this interesting. Be sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on if you'd like to see more on the topic. And if you're still here, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate your time. Take care.